Hello, hi. So I'm back with Lovecraft Country, Season 1, Episode 6, recap, talk through, predictions, and the like. And so I really enjoyed tonight's episode. I will say this. When I was watching the small, recap of episode 5, I did notice that in there they mentioned that Atticus had called South Korea, and so I remember what I said in last week's recap, that I was trying to figure out where he was calling, because I kept missing that part where they would say where he was calling, because I know that was kind of how the operator worked. They would say, we're connecting you to such and such place. And so I finally heard that. So that was cool. That was a nice little confirmation at the beginning. But then I realized that we were going to go back in time and do a quick flashback to the fall of 1949 in Daegu, South Korea, where we were going to meet I'm just going G, because they called her G in the show, so I'm going to call her that. We're going to meet her, and she's been showing up, and she showed up in I believe episode 2 when they were in Artem. They were in the rooms, and each George, Letty, and Atticus had kind of their personal visions, and G was in Atticus's personal vision. So it's like, okay, she's definitely a big part of him, and just has been a big influence on his life. And so it was really cool to finally get to learn more about her and see just how they kind of met up, how they came to know each other. And you can always kind of tell that their relationship was probably deeper than what he said necessarily, because he kind of, when he was talking to Letty about it, I believe in last week's episode, and he was kind of, she was asking, did he have a girlfriend over there? And he was like, yeah, there was someone that I cared about. So he was honest about the fact that he had strong feelings for her. And he said, but things ended weird. And that just felt odd, just because of where we are, and so much supernatural stuff is happening here. So I was very interested to see what that meant, and we got those answers. I really like how we are getting, with each episode we get more answers, but then it still always leaves us with more questions. So it's like you're getting these really big questions answered, but then in the meantime more questions are being added on top of it, which of course happened tonight as well. So we start the episode before the war, and so at least before the war gets to Daegu, South Korea, which is where G is. As she's a young nursing student, she's in school, she really enjoys movies. So the very first scene we see her in, she's in a movie theater watching a Judy Garland movie, and she gets up and sings, or at least in her mind she sings. And so that's really cool. I'm a fan of random outbursts of song, as someone who enjoys musicals. So that was neat to kind of see that, you get the feeling that she is a regular girl, because she's a student. So she's probably maybe in her late teens, possibly early 20s, but probably late teens, just by virtue of the way that her mom is kind of like, you need to bring a man home, and everything is very much about meeting a man and getting married, and kind of doing that thing where, especially in the 50s, it seems, it's interesting, like that was very common just in a lot of places, where it's like, if you were a young woman, yes, you might pursue an education, but ultimately the goal is to meet a man and to marry him, to then have children and become a wife, mother, etc. And so that's what's happening with all of the girls that she's in school with. So she's a nursing student, she's a dreamer. And so initially you think, okay, she's just a regular girl who her mom is like, you need to find a man. But then we quickly realize that her mom is single, and she has been raising her daughter alone, because for some reason her husband, who initially I assumed was G's father, but she just said, my husband is gone. So we assumed that he died. I assumed that he died. And so we meet G, we meet her mom, we see what's happening. Now, in all of that kind of light and normal and kind of cool backstory, we get some more insight. And you know, at first you would think at first glance that G's just a regular girl and her mom is just pushing her, you know, you need to meet a man, you need to settle down. And so she goes on kind of like a speed dating thing, which I thought the patriarchy just jumped out. Like, it was interesting how the men floated around to the women and then the men chose. Like, the women didn't get to choose at all. And as someone who has participated in speed dating before, that felt like trash, because it's like, what if he chooses me but I don't like him? Like, that can happen. Like, you guys should make a match. But of course, you know, I am in the 21st century and this is the 1950s. So I just thought that was very interesting. But so she strikes out at the I'm calling it speed dating or the matchmaking event. But her friend is like, you know, come with me. I don't want to be alone with him. This guy is attractive, but I don't really, you know, he's boring. But she's kind of like, no, I'm not going to go. Or she doesn't go. And then we cut to and we see her. She's at a bar and she's a little more gussied up, you know, because at the matchmaking event, she is very kind of plainly dressed. You know, she's not wearing any makeup. She has on her, looks like her nursing uniform. So it's very much like the prim and proper, you know, she's in school, so she does have education, but she's looking for a man to, I guess, possibly get married, etc. But then we see her at this bar and she's a little more jazzy, you know, got her hair done, got on a little lip, got on a little makeup, and she pulls a man. And so she takes the man home. And then they have the sex, and then she grows extra appendages, and it's like, it looked like one of those adult cartoons. I'll just say that. Those who know. Those who don't know, I don't want to give more explanation. It looked like one of those, and I was like, wow, that's okay, that's what we're doing. And then of course she kills the guy, and so now we see, wait a minute. If this is 1949, which is before the war, she's a creature before she meets Atticus, because obviously she hasn't met him yet. So we see that and it's like, interesting. And then, you know, the war comes, it's kind of on, just very propagandized, as a lot of wartime stuff is. The Americans come in and they're like, we're here to help you, we're here to save you, we're here to make your life better. And they just basically come in and, you know, commandeer that particular town. And now, you know, she's a nurse, so she is taking care of the wounded soldiers, and not just the Korean soldiers. She's taking care of all of them, the ones who are with America, because even though they are fighting with the American army or the American military, they're not all Korean. So we meet, so later we find, you know, Atticus comes into play, and then he has a friend who I believe is Chinese. I can't remember where, but he's not, or Japanese, but he's not Korean. And so, you know, we see that we have kind of this diverse, and I say diverse loosely, but we have this military that is not just made up of white men. And they initially cross paths, and something very horrific and upsetting happens, where they take the nurses, because G finds out that her friend, whose name I wrote down is Young Cha. Her friend is communist. She is agreeing with kind of the communist viewpoint, and she is likely a spy. We don't know for sure, but you know, you kind of see she's like whispering to this doctor, and I think the doctor, first of all, it was upsetting to watch, like, them ride down the street with a truck, have somebody on the back, and then like promptly hang him. I was like, that's aggressive. But you know, hanging as punishment for various things was not uncommon, just in general. Like, that was something that you know, you see show up in history as just kind of a method of punishing people whoever's culture at the time is deemed being anti whatever's happening at the time. And so at that point, In that moment, this person was considered a communist, and they were hung in the streets, which was bananas to me, but not surprising. And so she realizes, and so I couldn't tell. I was trying to see if that was the doctor. So in the comments, if you were watching that, was that the doctor that her friend was whispering to? Because I think that was him, but I couldn't tell for sure. Mainly because we only saw him from the back, and then he was hanging, and he kind of looked different when he was in the, when the guy was in the doctor working and kind of helping the soldier. So I couldn't tell, but I think he was, but I'm not 100% sure. Could have just been anyone that they deemed a communist, because I'm sure those types of practices were very common in those countries during wartime. I'm sure that was not just a one-off, like it was something that probably happened pretty regularly. And so we figured out that her friend is indeed a communist. She doesn't agree with what's happening, very likely, and she is actively kind of working to get her beliefs, or she's working to support the communists. And so after we see that crazy, upsetting scene of a person getting hanged in the street, we cut to now we see all of the nurses on the same shift that G and her friend Young work are being dragged out by soldiers, and they are being questioned. But anytime there's a scene where people are on their knees and someone's standing above them with a gun, I'm never optimistic that that's going to end well for everyone. Now, some people might make it out alive, but I'm always sure other people will not. And yes, so there were 2 nurses that were killed in Atticus, and that is when G meets Atticus. And he actually doesn't kill the nurse. Actually, no, he does. He kills the nurse next to her. But when you see him, he looks like dead in the eyes. Like his face looks dead. He looks, and I say dead, like it looks emotionless and expressionless. And so you can definitely tell that he's just following orders. He's doing, and he has to block the humanity of what's or the dehumaneness of what's happening. I don't know if that's a word, but he has to block that in order to be able to follow the orders of his superior. And so he shoots the girl next to G in the head, and then they come to her like they're about to shoot her, and then her friend says, "No, I am the communist," and they take her away. So it is assumed that they take her away and that they kill her. And and we find out later that they do kill her, but they torture her first. But that's what's taken. So when they cross paths again, now Atticus is injured and he's in the hospital where G works. And so of course she sees him, and she's pissed beyond festivity because she thinks that he killed her best friend. And we've also learned up until that now that we've learned that G, what creature she is, because we've seen that she has multiple appendages. So we've learned that she is a kumiho, which is a fox creature, 8-limbed fox creature. And so I have some notes here because I had to do a little research, had to understand what was happening here. So I wanted to understand what the kumiho is, and it is it's a 9-tailed fox creature, and it is similar. And so I was like, okay, well, what? And so when I'm reading, and so I just pulled up a quick wiki because I was like, this is some deeper diving that I would have to do, but I just wanted to get a general idea of what a kumiho is. And it is based in Chinese mythology, but it was introduced to Korean mythology. And so the kumiho, and it also is kind of similar, connected to I guess Japanese mythology as well, which they are kind of, I guess, interrelated or connected, or one led into the other. I'm not as familiar with Japanese mythology, but I've definitely done a little bit of digging into it. And so that, which was interesting when I did the research, I found that in Chinese, I'm going to kill it, it's called the hulichin. And then in Japanese, it's called the kitsune. I know about the kitsune because of Teen Wolf. And in the the remake of Teen Wolf that was on MTV that I watched and reviewed and enjoyed and found fantastic. In the later seasons, once they kind of went through the whole werewolf mythology, they started to expand the universe and they started to incorporate other types of mythos, and they incorporated a kitsune. And so one of the and she was actually Scott, the main character's girlfriend. She was a kitsune. And so I was like, oh, a kitsune, got it. Because kitsune was actually a pretty dope little creature there. And even though in reading this, the kumiho is kind of depicted, as they said, in a lot of instances as kind of this bloodthirsty creature that just is out to kill people, mostly men, because it is a creature that is... that can shapeshift, that collects souls, which is what she does. She mentions the 100 souls she has to collect to become a real person. So she's a collector of souls, and they typically collect the souls of men, and they often can shapeshift. It's a fox creature that can shapeshift into a beautiful woman, and of course they can become a beautiful woman to then lure men so that they can take their souls. And so that is what a kumiho is. And so initially, when G and Atticus meets, she's pissed. She sees him, and then she realizes that she can connect with him. So she tells her mom, you know what, I found, because initially, so she had gotten to the point where she was at her 99th soul. She had taken her 99th soul, and the what is it, a mudang, which I think is looked like kind of like a I don't know, I'm drawing a blank on word, but it was someone who the mudang summoned the kumiho in order to exact revenge on G's mother's husband, which we find out actually is not her biological father. G has gotten, had a child, and was a single mother and young, and met this guy who she just, she marries, and then he sexually abuses her daughter, and I don't know if he falls in love with her or eventually falls in love with her, which is mad inappropriate and just gross. But we see that happens, and her mother works with the mudang to summon the kumiho into the body of her daughter G to kill her husband because he is being inappropriate and he's sexually abusing her, and he's raping her daughter, on a regular ongoing basis, as if they're in, and it sounded to me like he was doing it as if there was like a relationship element, or he saw the mom and was like, oh, she has a pretty little daughter, let me marry her so that now I have access to the daughter. And so I think that that's what's happened, which is why she is here, which is why her mother does not have a husband. And so when they summoned the kumiho into G, her mom said, I'll pay the price. And then the mudang who did it said, once she has gathered 100 souls, then she will become human again, and she will return to who she was. She will become G again. So we see right now that G may or may not have like regular human emotions because she's not a human. She is a kumiho. And so she back to she meets Atticus. She's pissed because he killed her best friend. So right there, we automatically, or she thinks he killed her best friend. Right there, we automatically start to see that while she's supposed to be this emotionless creature who's a monster, she's really not. She's not emotionless at all because she really cares for and loves her best friend. And so she is angered, and her plan is to kill Atticus and to absorb him as her 100th soul, because that'll make her mother happy. Because even though she doesn't necessarily want to change, because she's accepted who she is, she loves her mother and wants to make her mother happy. So she's like, two birds, one stone. I get to kill this dude who killed my best friend and make my mother happy and absorb my 100th soul. So she takes him home with her. They're gonna have like a night out. And so she's like, cool. And what ends up happening is initially she shows up to the base. They're supposed to go on a night on a town, just, as she has done in the past when she's met men. And rather than doing that, he has arranged through his Uncle George to get a movie a Judy Garland movie so that they can watch it. And so she's like, oh my God, that is so sweet and fantastic. And so you can see she begins to lose her anger. And up until now, you know, they've been connecting. They have bonded over the Count of Monte Cristo, which is, you know, Montrose's favorite book, and he's reading it overseas or trying to read it. He lost his glasses when he got injured, and she's reading it to him. So they're bonding over literature and movies and kind of their love of entertainment, and also their shared escapism, but also their shared trauma, because they find out that they're both, you know, in this war, they're in this place because they're trying to escape something. And so they have bonded over this, but she's still pissed. She still wants to kill him. When they get back to her place and they're going to have the sex, she can't kill him. She doesn't want to. She realizes, wait, I feel something for him. And then he tells her he's a virgin. She's like, oh my God, this is like a whole thing. I have feelings for you. You have feelings for me. And she makes him leave. And so of course he doesn't know why. And so, you know, he's pissed. So then, and I was wondering, I made a note because he didn't seem to recognize her, even though he looked at her when he had them, when he, you know, had the gun, and because she was right next to the girl that he did shoot. I was thinking that maybe he didn't recognize her. Maybe he just couldn't see her. Because, you know, when I take my glasses off, and I take them off initially, like, I'm blind. I can't, everything is really fuzzy. It takes a minute for it to all kind of become regular, but then it's still fuzzy. So I'm like, maybe he just didn't remember her. But then I realized after she confronts him about killing her friend that he had to emotionally and mentally block that out so that he could, you know, proceed, which makes sense when you're in this horrific situation and you're doing these things that you wouldn't normally do. And so, but she tells him about her friend, but that she has feelings for him, and she realizes that they both have done horrible, monstrous things, as she said, but they are not the things that they've done, and they can still be redeemed. And so they can see in each other the good. And so now we have their relationship blossoming. It's wonderful. It's love. And then we find out that he has gotten all of the points. I guess at that time, if you're in the military, you need a certain amount of points before you can go home. I guess as it relates to draft, I should have looked that up. I did not. That is something I will look up after. But if you're familiar, in the comments, chime in about the way that it works when you serve, especially during draft time, where you were like being drafted into a major war. And so he had gotten enough points so he could go home. And so he's just like, he tells her, and she's like, you know what, I have to tell you something. And so she had been kind of introducing him to the idea of the kumiho. Anyway, she was reading a book about it. So like she was trying, you could tell she was trying to figure out how to prime him to let him know that she was a kumiho. And then when he tells her he's about to leave, you know, they have this moment, and then they have the sex. And this time she's not able to control her tails. And so her tails come out and they latch onto him, and she reads his future. So typically when she would take a soul, she would read the guy's life. And so she would see, you know, his whole life experience before he died. This time she does that and she sees his future. So but of course she's also trying to pull her tails back. She doesn't want to take his soul. And so she kind of throws him across the room. He's laying down on the floor, but naked, and he jumps up and he's like, what the hell? So he is like, I'm out. He runs away from her. She's trying to explain. It's kind of hard to explain to someone after you just grew 8 limbs, because they look like limbs or feet or arms, whatever it is, appendages. Like, what? We were about to have the sex and you had a bunch of appendages. It's a no for me. And so that's what happens. He leaves, and she goes into her mom's room, and she's hurt and upset. And her mom comes home, and her mom sees her there, and she's crying, and it's like, her mom knows that things didn't go well. And so that's essentially where it ends. And we're like, yo. So we see now that she saw, take that back. They go back to revisit the Mudeng, who then says, okay, first of all, you ain't got all your souls. Why are you over here? And then you asking me questions. And she essentially asks the Mudeng, is he going to die? And she doesn't, I don't know that she necessarily confirms or denies, per se, but you know, it's like I've never experienced this. This is new. What is happening? And so that is where we kind of end. We see this fox creature, which I thought was, the fox was really beautiful with the snow. It was all very beautiful. Cinematography was fantastic looking, but we see that end, and then we kind of end. And so this episode talks about a lot of things. It gets into, you know, we get to see a little bit more of the creature. We get to see a little bit more of some of the horrors that Tic endured in war, which definitely contributes, I'm sure, to his struggle to kind of let people in, and why he's really much kind of a solo person in a lot of situations, because he's gone through these things. And another thing I wanted to note, that I think that it is kind of, this whole episode is kind of discussing without discussing, is, and I've read about this, how in a lot of these, or in some of these Asian countries where there was like a war where you had Black soldiers, there was like this whole phenomenon of these where the soldiers would come, they would, you know, meet women who were native to those countries, because I read about it in Vietnam, but I'm pretty sure that it was a similar thing in Korea during the Korean War, where they would have these relationships with the women while they were there. And I mean, they could be there for years, so they could have these long-term sustaining relationships where they truly do care and love these women. But then when it's time for them to come back, it's time for them to come back. They're not residents of that country. And so they essentially leave the woman. And if they've been with her for a sustained period of time, she may have a child. And I've read articles kind of about that whole, you have these biracial children who are now in this country that were essentially kind of left by their American fathers. And I mean, I'm sure it's a factor in, you know, white men and but I'm talking about the Black people. So I thought it was interesting how there was basically a whole love story where that was kind of, I'm sure that was more common than you would think. And so I thought that was just kind of an interesting little historical, you know, Lovecraft Country is good for giving us these historical nuggets and Easter eggs and kind of pieces of education. So I thought that was interesting. But overall, we got some answers. And so now, next week, episode 7, we get to see Hippolyta, and she is going to have an adventure. And I'm excited because I knew she was about to have some good stuff happen. So I'm very excited to see what happens next. But this week, it was great getting that insight, and also seeing, is Tic really going to die? And if so, what does that mean for the story? So tell me, what do you think? What are your thoughts? What do you think is going to happen next? I can't really tell what's going to happen with Tic. So what I think, I still believe that Letty, because she died, I think that she has a connection to the other side. And I think that that's going to play a role in something that's going to happen down the line. So I still think that, I'm still predicting that. But now we see that Hippolyta has, obviously, either she has the ability for time travel herself, because we see her engaging with the Ori, but also, how does that factor in? Because if something happens to Tic and he does die, will he stay dead? Because I don't think that things in this series that die stay dead, which is my way of saying Uncle George. I hope Uncle George comes back. But that's my thoughts. What are your thoughts? Questions? Were you confused? Did you not get the connection to the larger story? Let's talk about it in the comments. This was a really cool episode. I really like the different feels. It's like you're watching a whole new show, but it's all interconnected, which I think is awesome. So let me know your thoughts. I will be back next week for a recap, but I also like to be in the comments to talk with you. So leave your thoughts, questions, notes, ideas, things you noticed down below, and let's chat. Until then, this was cool and fun. It was good talking with you, and I look forward to the next time that we can talk again. Bye.